There is a part of every human mind that lives in silence. A place where unspoken impulses gather, where forgotten memories rest, where emotions that never found a voice curl into themselves and wait. Jung called it the shadow, not because it is evil, but because it is unseen. And what the mind cannot face, it hides. Most people spend their lives running from this hidden terrain, believing the darkness within them is dangerous. Yet the truth is quieter, softer. The shadow is simply the part of yourself you were never allowed to acknowledge. The anger you swallowed. The desires you denied. The wounds you minimized. This is a journey into that unvisited space, into the quiet darkness that shapes who you become, even when you never look directly at it. There is a quiet moment in a person's life when they begin to sense that something inside them moves beneath the surface. A subtle presence they cannot name, yet feel in the background of every thought. It appears not as a dramatic event, but as a soft disturbance, an irritation that comes faster than expected, a sadness that lingers too long, a heaviness that rises at the slightest disappointment. Most people dismiss these moments as random mood shifts, tiredness, or stress. But beneath them lies the earliest whisper of the shadow. It is the inner self, trying to be seen after years of silence. The first glimpse of the shadow is rarely recognized as such. It often arrives disguised as something small. A sudden dislike of a harmless comment, the tightening of the chest during a conversation, or the quiet withdrawal when emotions feel too large to handle. Sometimes it shows up as a sense of unfamiliarity with one's own reactions, as if a stranger briefly took over the steering wheel. This is the shadow stepping forward, not to frighten, but to signal that an unacknowledged part of the self is yearning for attention. People often believe they fully know who they are, their personality, their preferences, their boundaries, their wounds. But identity is not a fixed surface. It is a layered landscape shaped by experiences, beliefs, memories, and unspoken emotions. The shadow forms the moment a person learns which parts of themselves are allowed and which must be hidden away. And when the shadow begins to stir, it doesn't announce itself with clarity. It expresses itself through subtle disruptions, small cracks in the routine behavior that once felt stable. Someone may wonder why anger feels sharper lately, why jealousy appears without warning, why loneliness feels heavier, even when surrounded by others. These emotions are not new. They are simply no longer contained. The first glimpse often feels like confusion. A person might say, "I don't know why I reacted that way," or "This doesn't feel like me," or "Something is off, but I can't explain it." These statements are clues, gentle reminders that the self is more complex than the image presented to the world. Jung believed the shadow is composed of everything a person refuses to acknowledge. Traits they disown, memories they suppress, truths they find uncomfortable. But these hidden parts do not disappear, they wait. And when they finally rise, they do so quietly, appearing through patterns rather than revelations. Someone may notice they keep avoiding a certain type of conversation, or that they feel threatened by vulnerability, or that they carry envy toward people who express emotions freely. These reactions are reflections. mirrors held up by the shadow, asking to be seen. The first glimpse can also arrive during moments of stillness. In the quiet of late night, when distractions fade and the world slows down, a person may suddenly feel an inexplicable discomfort, as if a truth is pressing against their awareness. They may sense unresolved fears, old disappointments, or forgotten desires resurfacing like faint echoes from the past. The shadow often speaks the loudest when the environment becomes silent. But the most telling sign of the shadow's emergence is the feeling of emotional dissonance. When someone's outward behavior does not match their inner emotional reality. They may smile when something hurts, stay calm when anger rises, or stay quiet when longing fills their chest. Over time, this dissonance grows, creating a tension that becomes harder to ignore. The shadow enters consciousness through this tension, urging the person to notice the gap between who they pretend to be and who they truly are. In this first encounter, fear is common. People often assume that anything hidden must be dangerous. Yet the shadow is not a threat, it is a container of unexpressed truth. It holds the emotions a person believed were unacceptable, the impulses they learned to suppress, the dreams they were told were unrealistic. The shadow is simply the part of the self that never had permission to live in the light. And when it begins to reveal itself, it does so because the mind can no longer carry the weight of invisibility. The first glimpse of the shadow is not the beginning of darkness. It is the beginning of awareness. A quiet invitation to understand the parts of the self that have been waiting in silence. The shadow does not appear suddenly, it is shaped quietly over years, forming in the small moments when a person learns which parts of themselves are welcomed and which parts must disappear. Childhood is where this shaping begins, not through dramatic events alone, but through subtle emotional lessons. A child watches the world carefully, studying the reactions of the people they depend on for survival. If anger brings disapproval, the child learns to swallow it. If sensitivity is mocked, they learn to hide it. If sadness is dismissed, they learn to numb it. Slowly, piece by piece, the self divides into what is allowed and what must be pushed into the dark. This is the birthplace of the shadow. In these early years, a child has no words for such division. They do not think, "I will repress this part of myself." Instead, they adapt instinctively, shaping their behavior to ensure connection, safety, and belonging. The traits that bring warmth, acceptance, and praise become part of the visible self. The traits that cause discomfort, conflict, or rejection sink beneath the surface. A child who is told to be good often learns that compliance is acceptable while defiance is not, even when defiance would have protected their boundaries. A child who is praised for being quiet may begin to silence curiosity or emotional expression, believing their voice disrupts the world. A child who receives love only when they appear strong learns to hide vulnerability, burying the tender parts of themselves so deeply they forget they were ever there. And yet, the hidden traits do not disappear. They remain alive, waiting, shaping the shadow that will follow them into adulthood. Cultural expectations add another layer. A society may value independence and strength, punishing softness as weakness. It may reward emotional restraint, teaching people to numb their sensitivity. It may praise productivity over rest, turning stillness into guilt. Over time, people hide not just personal emotions, but entire human capacities: creativity, desire, playfulness, intuition, outrage, grief. Anything that does not fit the script is quietly moved into the shadows. Family roles influence the formation as well. The responsible one learns to hide fear. The funny one hides sorrow. The capable one hides exhaustion. The peacemaker hides anger. In this way, identities become masks worn so long that the person underneath begins to blur. And beneath each mask, the shadow grows heavier with everything that was never expressed. Jung believed that the shadow contains both darkness and unclaimed light. But in childhood, the distinction isn't clear. A child simply hides whatever threatens their connection to the adults they depend on. Even positive qualities, intuition, assertiveness, imagination, sensuality, may be suppressed if they cause discomfort or confusion. Over time, these lost qualities become misunderstood by the adult self, emerging later as irritability, emptiness, or restlessness without explanation. Trauma, whether large or quiet, deepens the shadow further. A child who learns that expressing emotion leads to punishment creates a shadow full of unspoken grief. A child who grows up around unpredictable behavior learns to hide their own needs to avoid conflict, adding unmet longing to the shadow's weight. A child who experiences emotional neglect learns that their inner world has no place in the outer one, pushing their sensitivity into silence. These experiences become the foundation of the adult shadow, an archive of every feeling that never found a safe space. But even in stable homes, the shadow still forms. No childhood is perfect. Every family, every culture, every environment teaches certain emotions are appropriate, while others are too much. The child absorbs these lessons, often without awareness, until the divide between the outer self and the hidden self becomes familiar. By adulthood, the shadow feels like a mystery, but it is not mysterious. It is simply the accumulation of everything a person learned to hide in order to survive, fit in, or feel loved. And long before they recognize it, the shadow has already shaped the patterns of their life. The relationships they choose, the emotions they avoid, the dreams they quiet, the fears they carry. The shadow begins in innocence, not in darkness. It begins in the human need to be seen and accepted. And what begins as protection eventually becomes the silent force guiding the parts of a person they do not fully understand. The shadow exists not because humans are flawed, but because the mind is built to protect itself. Psychology describes it as the unconscious reservoir of everything a person pushes away. Impulses, emotions, memories, and traits that feel incompatible with the version of themselves they want the world to see. Jung understood this long before neuroscience could explain it. The brain is designed to reduce emotional overload, to keep a person functional even when their inner world becomes too heavy. When an emotion feels threatening, the mind tucks it into the unconscious. When a memory is too painful, the mind seals it away. When a trait seems unacceptable, the mind disguises it behind behavior that feels safer. Over time, these hidden pieces accumulate until they form a second psychological landscape beneath the visible one. This landscape is the shadow. From a scientific perspective, repression plays a crucial role. The brain instinctively suppresses emotions that cannot be processed in the moment. An overwhelmed child buries fear. A conflicted teenager buries shame. An exhausted adult buries longing. These unprocessed states are stored in neural pathways that remain active even when forgotten. They do not disappear. They simply fall out of conscious awareness.